failed, and of course the current Cameron government is failing as well.
Sorry, continue.
I was just going to say that this is one of the underlying reasons why the British have turned to financialisation.
So what alternative model could an independent Scotland follow?
Well, it's a very good question, and I think there are, again, a number of answers to it. There's no simple answer to it, but one of the things I think that independence would equip Scotland to do is to provide something that no British government has ever done or could do, and that's to develop a long-term strategy for the development of Scotland's economy. And of course there are numerous strands to this, but in order for Scotland to do that, it would need the powers and the steering mechanisms that only independence can provide. And if you think about it, the pattern of governance of Scotland, even with devolution, since the 1950s, is we've had a Tory government come into office for 10 or 15 years, introducing a wide range of reforms and market-oriented economic policies, welfare reforms, fiscal policies, changes to tax and benefit system. And then after 10 or 15 years of Tory government, a Labour government comes into office, usually for 5 or 6 years, and undoes all those policies and institutes its own reforms. And then after Labour's been in power for 5 or 6 years, Tories come into office again for another 10 or 15 years. They undo all the Labour Party reforms. It's short-termism, but I think the point we need to appreciate here is this has created a great deal of instability and uncertainty in Scotland. It's done a lot of damage to Scotland. And you can cite industrial policy, you can cite the welfare reforms, you can cite the inadequacies of migration policy. If you regress back to 2001, for example, although it's still more or less the case today, the vast majority of migrants to the UK settle in England. I think in 2001 there were around 500,000 migrants to the UK. Of those 500,000 migrants, 94% of them, 470,000 of them, settled in England. Less than 4%, 18,500 settled in Scotland, and the remaining 2.5% settled in Wales and Northern Ireland. And of course one of the issues here is that the vast majority of UK migrants arrive at UK destinations in the south of England, in seaports and of course the big airports, particularly the London airports. But there's another issue here as well, of course, because historically UK migrants have settled in England, then UK migrant populations have been established in England, so new migrants to the UK want to join those communities. Mm-hmm. And for a migrant who's already travelled several thousand miles, arriving at a port in the south of England, the view to Scotland, another 500 or 600 miles up the road, is a pretty daunting prospect as well. Mm-hmm. And I suppose
you've heard the idea that the Scottish society is more integrated than England. Living down here, do you think that's actually true?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of kind of anecdotes I could kind of demonstrate that. I mean, I remember when I kind of lived in Edinburgh, we used to have, when I was a kid, we used to have what were called poo routes, where the bride and groom after the wedding would leave the church, and as they got into the car to go on their honeymoon, they would throw coppers out onto the pavement, pour out the money, in other words, and all the kids would scramble together to gather as much money as they could. We'd all kind of fight with each other for the money. Now, okay, that was a long time ago, so we need to be careful not to romanticise this kind of contemporary Scotland in that from that perspective. But one of the things that struck me when I first moved down to England, to Cambridge, was I'd been living next to a next-door neighbour for about 9 months, and kind of knew them reasonably well in the sense that we'd talk to each other briefly over the garden fence, and maybe we met each other in the street or in town, we'd just exchange pleasantries. But in spite of the fact I'd been living with next to this couple for 9 months, I came out of my door one Saturday morning, and there was this huge limousine outside the door with these white ribbons on it. And as I was coming out, my next door neighbour came out wearing a a bridal gown. She was getting married, and I'd known her for 9 months, and I'd seen her for periods before that, and immediately before that. But the first I knew that she was getting married was when I saw this car and saw her coming out of her house, and that would never have happened when I was a kid in Edinburgh, because weddings were very much communal. I mean, it's very different now, I appreciate that, but
people tell their Facebook friends, not their neighbours now.
Well, yes, of course, technology is kind of as intruded there, as in so many other areas of life. But
I'm still not on Facebook and proud of it.
but I think that the point is that I think it is fair to say, and surveys have demonstrated this, that there is less hostility to migrants in Scotland than there is in most parts of England, although I think most of the hostility to migration in England is in the southern half of England. It's quite interesting, for example, Ed Miliband made his famous immigration speech a few weeks ago from Peterborough, and one thing that wasn't picked up by the Scottish press, or the blogosphere for that matter, was the significance of Peterborough. I mean, I don't think Ed Miliband and his advisors chose Peterborough by getting a map of England out and sticking a pin in it. It was a very deliberate choice, because Peterborough, since 1971, has seen an increase of over 60% in its population. Its population now is 170,000, and of course the vast majority of that increase is accounted for by migration. Compare that to the relatively stagnant growth of Scotland's population in the same period. And why is that important? Well, many economists argue that migration adds somewhere between 0.5% to 1% to a country's GDP. But there's another more important reason, looking ahead to future decades, and that is that Scotland is facing a demographic time bomb. In the first half of the 21st century, we're going to have an increasing population of older people, largely economically inactive people, who are going to be more and more dependent on a smaller population of working age members of the population. And if Scotland doesn't have its own migration policy, then it's difficult to see how Scotland can avoid ultimately in the next 4 or 5 decades declining into a backwater of the UK economy, because Scotland is unique, and in fact, among with the exception of countries like Wales and Northern Ireland, among smaller European economies, and hardly seen any change in its population over the last 50 years.
And there is a lot of space in Scotland.
There's a lot of space, and of course it's obviously the case that one of the reasons there appears to be less hostility in Scotland to migrant communities than many communities in England, particularly in the south of England, is because Scotland has much less experience of migration than many communities in England. So
I think some in the Irish Catholic community would kind of disagree.
Yeah, but
it's still a fact that most, just a point about Scotland rather than the general issue of the independence here, but it's still the case that most attacks on minorities in Scotland are against Irish Catholic.
Oh yeah, my grandfather came from Ireland, and my maternal uncle was in the mother's maternal uncle was in the original IRA. So I know what you're saying.
I've always felt that an independent settlement would help to solve these problems instead of exacerbate them. I don't know where you stand on that.
Yeah, I mean, some people say there's a lot of wishful thinking in that, and I mean, I think it is true that the left in particular needs to be very careful about idealising independence. It's something that maybe many on the left are guilty of, but I think that's just a reflection of the aspirations that the left have for Scotland's future. And in fact, that returns back to a question you asked earlier about what's going on just now. How do we explain what's happening in Scotland just now? I mean, I think as ever, there are so many issues here, but migration is one area. The other area that I think does need to be picked up is the future of Scotland, and this issue, which I think is important, that many people in the No campaign and many people who intend to vote No in 2014 seem to be informed by these short-term time horizons, and they don't seem to be looking any further ahead than the next British election or the next British parliamentary term from 2015 onwards. And I think if we extend our horizons further than that, again, it's not just a question of idealising Scotland, which the left maybe has a propensity to do, because the kind of competitive radicalism of the left is never more intense than when capitalism is in crisis. And it's not difficult, looking around the press, the left-oriented press and media, and of course the blogosphere, to encounter those. In fact, on that subject, and this is something that I think on the pages of Bella we've explored before. One of the things that interests me about Eric Coleman Wright's Real Utopias project is that it does provide an agenda, possible agenda, for the Scottish left. It might be better to maybe say a few words about what a real utopia is. I mean, for most people, obviously, a utopia is an ideal society, usually future-oriented, though it can refer to a golden age in the past. And what Wright is effectively saying to the left is that rather than, because he's interested in developing pathways to socialism, what Wright is effectively saying is that rather than idealise these utopias and look at these unreal utopias, why don't we look around us in the world today to see what real people in real communities are doing across the world? And he gives a number of examples in the book to illustrate what a real utopia is. He discusses participatory budgeting, basic income, cooperatives, Mondragon in Spain. And it's effectively what he's saying is, here's the pathway that you can follow. Here's the beginning of the path. I can't tell you what your destination is, but why not start walking on this path and see where it takes you? And I like the kind of open-endedness of that. But there's a lot of things in Marxism in particular that Wright's thesis feeds into. For example, if you think about, I mean, as much as there is a unified Marxist theory of human nature, it's clear that in Marx's works themselves, he's communicating to us that there is a double-sidedness to human nature. For example, one side of our nature, we can kind of identify as things like all people need to sleep, eat, drink, shelter. And whatever human society you're looking at whatever period of human history, that's the case. But there's also another side to human nature from a Marxist perspective, and that is that much of our human nature is determined by the mode of production, by the societies that we live in. And what those societies do is to naturalise relations of production. And now capitalism has unquestionably succeeded in this. You hear people every day saying that it's only natural for people to be competitive. It's only natural for people to want to make more money, and so on.
Or the misinterpretation of Darwin that's put onto capitalist society is another example of this.
Yeah, another variant of that, yeah. And of course, in a sense, they're right. What they're saying is right. But what they should say, what they should be taken to mean is that what modes of production do is naturalise certain means of certain relations of production, like competition, like making money, like marketisation, like the creation and expansion of value.
Whereas just as easily, with time, cooperation could become the...
Yeah, well, I think this is in effect one way of reading what Wright is saying about real utopias, because it seems to me that the left has historically dismissed our capacity to construct to develop alternative relations of production to capitalism within capitalism itself. And I think this is really what Wright is trying to communicate to us. And of course, no one is suggesting that this is easy, but the whole point about real utopias is it's saying that there is a transitory path to socialism, that is an alternative to traditional socialist conceptions of socialism. And he's thinking here, among other things, of the revolutionary leap to socialism. And I think if you look at Scotland today and other countries, advanced capitalist countries today, it's just not plausible to suggest that workers are on the verge of a socialist revolution. And I'm not sure how plausible it was even to imply, as many on the left historically have done, that we could go to bed at night living under capitalist relations of production and wake up in the morning living under socialist relations of production.
So what do you think, like in all of the debate that's going on around independence at the moment, do you think the pro-independence left that aren't members of the SNP totally left out of the debate? It's only things like Bella and some of the bloggers that are picking up the slack on that, because there's so much of a debate going on that isn't in the mainstream, because the mainstream's putting it as it's the SNP or it's the Union.
Yeah, I mean, I think you do get the sense from listening to the No campaign that the prize for them in 2014 is amounts to little more than the satisfaction of knowing that they've stuffed the SNP. And fair enough. That's politics, I suppose. But it's not only doing a huge disservice to the Yes campaign. I think in some ways it's doing a disservice to the SNP. Like many people, I kind of have a kind of love-hate relationship with it. I mean, I wish the SNP was a different party to what it was. I wish it would take a more emphatic social democratic turn. I mean, I'm not a social democrat myself, obviously, but I'd certainly settle for an independent Scotland becoming a progressive social democracy in my lifetime.
Like you said earlier, piece by piece is better than waiting for the grand turn where everything comes at the same time.
I mean, if the revolutionary leap is going to happen,